Welcome back to Horns High Studios for another episode of 666 Seconds of Murder. That means each one of these videos is less than 666 seconds or 11 minutes and 6 seconds. So no time to waste. Let's get to it. But don't forget to like this video, drop a comment below. It helps the video get out there to more people. If you're not a subscriber, consider doing that before you leave today. I sure appreciate it. It helps the channel grow. It's important to remember that this video is for informational purposes only. These are just my opinions and speculation. I'm not an expert, but I'm using some good common sense to help analyze this case. I'm not saying anyone is guilty of anything, all right? All of what I say is alleged, all right? Now, for this episode, I'd like to discuss that pesky brass button snap on the K-bar knife sheath. Now, I say pesky because those who like to hang their hat on that touch or transfer DNA in this case, that brass button has got to be driving them crazy. Because when you throw some science at people who don't want to listen, it's like explaining the earth is round to a flat earther. Now, believe me, we see that kind of thing on both sides, okay? I'm not just saying one side does this and not the other. Both do it, okay? I try to stay as neutral as I can, but the more and more I look at this case, the more I believe that they've got the wrong guy in the Latah County Jail. Now, I've done a true crime deep cuts episode on the Idaho 4 investigation, the crime scene investigation, and the DNA evidence. I interviewed a former Australian federal police officer, Mick, to weigh in on that whole situation, and he was very helpful to make this make sense. And I'm sure that many of you have seen that, but if you haven't, check the description and go check it out. It's a good video. It's a longer video, not like these. If you did see it, I've got more information to share with you about the brass button snap. And I was thinking about a bag that I still use to this day that I got in 1992 when I was in the Army. So this is the bag. It's a helmet bag, basically. I was in a cav unit, a cavalry unit, and I used to use it for like snacks and personal stuff when I went out in the field. But it has these pockets on the back, and these are brass button snaps. I got wondering about this bag, and I'm going to put some close-up pictures up on the screen so you guys can see these buttons a little bit better. But on each side of this is a brass button, okay? And this is from 1992, so this is 32 years old. But it's still held up pretty well, and it's a helmet bag for pilots, but I used it for my purposes, but it worked really well. So how does this relate to the Idaho 4 case? Well, we know that the K-bar knife, according to the manufacturer, uses a brass button snap to hold the knife in place at the top. It prevents the knife from falling out of the sheath if you're like crawling around or doing stuff like that. Why would they use brass for a button snap, just like on my Army bag? Well, it's to prevent bacteria and that sort of thing to grow, and it's also anti-corrosive. Brass doesn't rust. Very interesting, right? Now, some people asked about a clear coat that they think was put on the button, and if that could have allowed the DNA to last longer. Now, my buttons never had a clear coat on them. They were painted, but it wore off very quickly going out into the field with it all the time. I consulted with a weapons expert and was told that the clear coat would need to be reapplied annually if you wanted it to last, plus, and that would of course depend on the climate you're in and what you're doing with it, plus no real need for it since brass doesn't rust. So, you know, that made sense when I heard that. And we have no idea how old the sheath was. I mean, it could be 50, 60 years old. We have absolutely no idea, okay? Now, I was watching a video with my 9-year-old grandson about common household items and some interesting facts. And they mentioned doorknobs and how they often were made with brass to prevent the spread of germs. How interesting. And that's when I decided to do this video, because the use of brass to prevent bacteria and things like that to grow, in this case, is extremely important. Also, when I was in Army basic training, the floor drain cover in the bathrooms was brass. And I know this because we used to have to take it out, clean it, and then brasso it, which was a material you put on the brass to polish it and make it shine. So the drain cover would have been a smart thing to make out of brass to prevent the growth of bacteria in a bathroom. All right. So the question is, how long does DNA last on brass? Well, like most things, it depends who you ask. Some of the creators I've watched reference a study that was done involving the DNA of salmon instead of human DNA. It was fascinating, though, and I'll see if I could find that and put it in the description so you can read it if you're interested. It mentions that DNA doesn't survive well on brass or copper. In their study, DNA didn't last more than 2 or 3 hours on those surfaces. In another article I read, it said that there are significantly lower amounts of DNA within minutes when it's on copper or brass. Now, some of you may be wondering why this matters. Well, think about what time the call to 911 was made. Just before noon, right? The lead detective, Brett Payne, didn't show up until 4 p.m., 4 hours later. That's what he said, at least in the PCA. We have no idea when the sheath was discovered. We don't know, we do know, I should say, that it was not on his first pass through the crime scene. He mentions that in the PCA. So it could have been hours later, minutes later. We have no idea, okay? Even if you want to believe that Brett Payne found this the moment he walked in the door at 4 p.m., let's just say, that's 12 hours after the crimes happened if you believe the PCA. I think it's more like 13 or 14 hours, but that's what they say. But still, 12 hours. When the study said with the fish DNA, it wouldn't last more than 2 or 3 hours. Again, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I don't know the difference between human and fish DNA, okay? But I don't see it being that radically different that the study would be that far off base here, okay? Even if you doubled it, if you tripled it, it would still be gone before he got there, okay? The DNA expert, Becca Barlow, testified to the grand jury for the defense and said it should never be used as evidence. It is only a tool to help investigators, kind of like a lie detector test, right? I mentioned in other videos, our own U.S. military doesn't allow touch DNA to be used in court. Mick, the former Australian officer that I talked to, he said Australia doesn't allow it, especially if the DNA is on a transferable item, such as a knife sheath. Anybody could have put it there, he said. Another thing about DNA analysis is that for it to be legit, you have to be able to repeat the test and get the same results. You can't do that in this case because the sample was so small, there's not enough to repeat it. Not to mention all the shady behavior around this IgG evidence that they did at the FBI that supposedly led them to Bryan Kohberger. Now, I know that some of this I've covered in other videos, and I talked with A.R. Hayes about it last night on the live that we did together. But I thought it would be helpful to kind of pull it all together and add to the discussion. This is an ongoing thing, and I know you guys are interested. And I've been seeing a lot of stuff in the comments about DNA in this case. So, I want to try to paint the picture as even as I can. And this is what I'm finding, okay? Now, for DNA to be scientifically accurate, the desired amount is 500 picograms. A picogram is 1 trillionth of a gram. A gram is how much sugar is in a sugar packet. So imagine how small a trillionth of that is, okay? So we're talking about crazy small amounts here. Anyway, in the case of the Idaho 4, they don't have 500, they've got 90. That's 18% of what you need to be scientifically accurate. Now, Mick told me that some of the more cutting edge labs can get pretty accurate results even at 200 and 300 picograms, but 90, that's super low. That's half or more of that. And they're basically guessing when they're doing the analysis to fill in the blanks. And this is referred to as the stochastic effect. Pretty interesting. So what does that all mean in this case? Well, I suspect the knife sheath was planted. I mean, we don't know if the K-bar was even used in the attacks. We don't have any autopsy results, but we do know that the wounds were different according to some of the things we heard in interviews. So most likely different weapons and most likely multiple attackers. Do we know if they even collected a sample from the sheath? You know, how did they do it? You know, did they just take it from the door of Brian's apartment, if the doorknob isn't brass, that is, or maybe his car door handle, right? We don't know. Would they plant evidence against Brian Kohberger? I don't know. Why would they do it? Well, the obvious answer to that is to pin something on him that he didn't do. I don't know why. I really don't. Even if you want to think Brian's skin cells ended up on that sheath somehow before, like he handled it at the store or something like that, if it was on the brass snap, there's no way it would have lasted days or weeks before this happened. It has to, in my opinion, I do not see any other way than this evidence is planted. It would not have lasted that long. So who planted it? Well, I did a video over the weekend about it. Lots of questions here. Too many for this video. Was it the Cowboys? A lot of you said that in the comments. Maybe it was Brett Payne or one of the roommates. Who knows, right? So comment below what your thoughts. I'm definitely interested to see what you've got to say about it. I do want to thank my friends at the Horntie Club. You guys are awesome. I sure appreciate that very much. And I appreciate all of you guys that watch these videos with me. And we'll see you next time for another episode of 666 Seconds of Murder.